The grand hall shimmered with gold and silk, a symphony of polished smiles and calculated power. Every movement was measured, every whisper monitored. Elira Ashvale had never belonged here, yet somehow she had convinced herself that tonight she could survive. She had borrowed a dress, smoothed her hair until it lay almost invisible, and kept her head down as she navigated through a crowd of nobles and alphas. She didn't expect her body to betray her. 2 days without proper food left her weak, trembling, and dizzy. As she crossed the ballroom, her knees gave way. Her vision blurred. For a heartbeat, she thought she might scream, but then everything went dark. Gasps rippled through the hall. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The music stopped. All eyes turned toward the center, where Elira crumpled like a fallen leaf. For a moment, no one moved. She was nothing but an outsider, a girl who shouldn't have been seen, and the world seemed to confirm it. Then, a presence. Calm, unyielding, and undeniable. Kaelric Thorn, Alpha King of the largest pack territories, ruler whose authority was felt rather than announced, moved through the frozen crowd. The chatter, the whispers, the judgment, they all faded as his gaze fixed on her. No one dared step in. No one dared approach. He reached her in strides that seemed to bend time. Strong arms lifted her effortlessly, and warmth enveloped her like a shield. His scent, power, and presence pressed against her, grounding her in a way no one else ever had. The room seemed to shrink around them, eyes wide and mouths open in silent awe. "Bring food," Kaelric ordered, his voice calm but unshakable. Servants rushed forward, but he didn't release her. He didn't let her go. Not yet. Elira's fingers trembled as she tried to push herself upright, but her strength wasn't enough. His gaze never wavered, sharp, assessing, protective. Her heart pounded, a chaotic rhythm against the steady beat of his presence. For what, he asked quietly when she muttered an apology she barely understood. For being here, she whispered, shame curling in her chest. Kaelric's lips pressed into a line unreadable. Then he turned toward the crowd. "If anyone here believes hunger is a crime," he said softly, the authority in his tone silencing murmurs, "you are free to leave." No one moved. No one dared. He shifted his attention back to her, the intensity in his eyes igniting something inside her she didn't yet recognize. Not possession. Not ownership. Something far more dangerous. "You're staying," he said finally, almost gently. Elira looked up at him, startled. I don't belong here." Kaelric's gaze didn't waver. "You do now." And in that moment, amidst the whispers and the stunned nobles, she realized that for the first time, someone powerful had refused to let her go. Elira's hands shook as she held the warm plate, the rich aroma of stew filling her senses. Her legs felt like lead, but Kaelric didn't let her sit back down. He stayed close, his presence pressing against her in a way that made her pulse spike, grounding her even as the room seemed impossibly distant. "You should eat," he murmured, voice low and intimate. Slowly. She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight, a mix of exhaustion and something else she couldn't name. Kaelric didn't move, didn't turn away, didn't let anyone step between them. Every noble who dared glance her way quickly looked away, intimidated by the sheer force of his attention. When she finally took a sip of the broth, his gaze softened ever so slightly, and her chest tightened. She wasn't used to being watched like this, not with patience, not with care, not with intent. The world had always moved over her, past her, ignoring her existence. But here, in the Alpha King's presence, she mattered. "You're stronger than you look," he said quietly, the edge in his tone that had silenced the entire room moments ago replaced by something almost teasing. Alira's eyes flicked up, catching the faintest curve of a smirk on his lips. Heat pooled low in her belly, confusing and frightening her all at once. She wasn't sure if it was the hunger leaving her body or the way his gaze made her pulse spike. Kilrick leaned just slightly closer, enough that the scent of him wrapped around her, a heady mix of authority and something dangerously magnetic. And yet, he murmured, voice almost a growl, you still nearly let yourself fall. Her cheeks burned, and she looked away, trying to focus on the plate in her hands. But the subtle command in his tone, the way he lingered close, made her heart hammer. She realized, with a mixture of fear and longing, that she was aware of every inch of him, every movement, every breath, every impossibly strong line of his body. The servants brought more food, but Kilrick didn't let them take over. Not once. He stayed. He watched. He protected. And for the first time in her life, Alira understood the dangerous power of being seen by someone who didn't just notice you, but refused to look away. The hall had emptied, leaving only the soft echo of distant music and the murmur of servants tidying up. Alira sat on the edge of a gilded bench, hands still trembling, plate long emptied, yet her heart refused to settle. Kilrick had left her side for a moment to speak with a noble whose audacity nearly outshone his fear, but even in his absence, the weight of his gaze lingered, invisible and suffocating. You shouldn't have come. Kilrick's voice suddenly cut through the quiet. He appeared beside her without a sound, his boots clicking softly against the marble floor. Alira froze. I had to, she whispered, not trusting her own voice. I've never seen, he silenced her with a raised hand, his presence a wall of heat and authority. You risked everything, he said, tone low, deliberate. And for what? Curiosity. Her stomach tightened. To know what it's like to see. To belong somewhere, even if just for a moment. Kilrick's dark eyes softened slightly, just enough to make her pulse skip. Belonging is earned, he murmured. And yet, you've claimed it by sheer audacity. Do you understand what you've done? She shook her head, and the corner of his mouth twitched, an almost imperceptible smirk that sent a shiver down her spine. No one dares be this bold with me, he continued, leaning just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. And yet, you're here, still standing, still defiant, still tempting me. Alira's breath caught. That word, tempting, made her pulse thunder in her ears. She hadn't meant to notice, hadn't meant to feel, and yet every fiber of her being knew exactly what he meant. Kilrick straightened slightly, giving her a fraction of space, though not enough to let her breathe freely. Tomorrow, he said, voice lower, almost a growl, you will leave before dawn. But tonight, you stay, under my roof, protected, not because you're mine, but because someone needs to ensure that daring doesn't destroy you. Alira swallowed, her throat dry, heat pooling in ways she didn't understand. For the first time, she realized that protection could feel as intimate, as dangerous, as desire itself. And that staying close to the Alpha King wasn't just survival, it was a risk she wanted to take, even if it terrified her. Morning arrived with a muted haze of sunlight spilling through the tall windows. Alira had barely slept, not from fear, but from the relentless awareness of Kilrick's proximity, even in her dreams. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb him or the servants who had arranged her modest quarters under his watchful orders. A knock at the door startled her. Before she could answer, it opened to reveal Kilrick, his dark hair slightly mussed, eyes sharper than ever. Breakfast, he said simply, holding a tray. No warmth, no smile, yet every motion carried an unspoken authority that made her pulse quicken. Thank you, she whispered, cheeks burning. He stepped inside fully, closing the door with a slow, deliberate click. The room suddenly felt smaller, charged, as if every inch of space vibrated with the tension between them. "You're still weak," he murmured, setting the tray down, physically and otherwise. Alira's hands trembled slightly. "I can manage," she replied, trying to steady her voice, though the heat pooling low in her belly betrayed her calm. Kelrick's gaze didn't waver. "Manage," he repeated softly, leaning closer. "You're barely surviving a single night in my world." And yet, his dark eyes flicked to hers, unreadable and dangerous. "You did it anyway." Before she could respond, a sharp rap on the door cut through the tension. A messenger, breathless, handed Kelrick a folded note. His fingers brushed hers briefly, sending an electric shock up her arm. His expression hardened as he read. "Someone from your past?" Alira asked, voice barely audible. Kelrick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the note on the table, eyes flicking back to hers. "A warning," he said finally. "They know you're here, and not everyone will respect my boundaries." The words hit harder than any physical blow. She had fled, hidden, survived, and now the past she thought she left behind threatened to catch her. Her heartbeat raced, not just from fear, but from the intoxicating danger of being so utterly exposed in front of him. Kelrick stepped closer again, heat and authority radiating like a living thing. "Stay close," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Do exactly as I say. One wrong move, and this. Protection." He let the word linger. Could vanish in an instant. Alira's stomach twisted with adrenaline and desire. She realized, with a mixture of dread and longing, that surviving in Kelrick's world wasn't just about obeying. It was about surrendering, inch by inch, to someone who could destroy her or make her feel more alive than ever. The day passed in a haze of controlled chaos. Kelrick never left her side, yet never touched without reason. Every glance carried weight, every movement a reminder of his dominance. Alira felt the heat of his gaze as she moved through the corridors of his estate, her heart hammering not just from fear, but from the raw awareness of his power. By afternoon, a commotion erupted near the gates. Alira's instinct screamed this was no ordinary visitor. Kelrick's head tilted slightly, sensing the threat before anyone else. Inside, he ordered, voice low, commanding. Alira barely had time to comply before Kelrick's massive presence filled the doorway. The guards shifted immediately, forming a protective perimeter. Outside, shadows moved too deliberately to be coincidence. Someone was watching, waiting, hunting. She wanted to shrink back, to hide in the corner, but Kelrick's hand brushed hers, not aggressively, but possessively. "Stay close," he murmured. The warmth of his palm against hers sent a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. Minutes stretched like hours. Then a courier appeared, panting, handing Kelrick a sealed envelope. He didn't break the seal immediately. Instead, he studied Alira, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. His dark eyes lingered, almost intimate, before he finally opened the letter. A single line made his jaw tighten. She shouldn't be here alone. Kelrick's grip on her wrist tightened subtly, not painfully, but enough to communicate ownership, protection, and warning all at once. "They're coming," he said softly, voice like velvet over steel. "You trust me." Alira's breath caught. She wanted to protest, to assert herself, but the pull of his presence, the certainty in his tone, left her silent. "Yes," she whispered, trembling. "Good," he replied, releasing her hand slightly but keeping his shadow over her. He guided her through hidden corridors she had never noticed, past servants and guards who gave him space automatically. Every step, every brush of his coat against hers, was a lesson in patience and desire. By the time they reached a secure chamber, Alira realized something dangerous. She was no longer just grateful. She was drawn in, willingly, to the alpha who could destroy her world with a glance, or make it burn brighter than she'd ever imagined. Kilrick stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with his natural alpha musk. "You're safe, for now," he whispered, almost against her ear. "But danger has a name, and it starts with you." Alira's pulse raced, desire and fear tangled together, knowing she was trapped, yet unwilling to escape. Night fell over the estate like a velvet cloak. Shadows pooled in the corners, whispering secrets Alira didn't want to hear. Kilrick's presence was a constant shadow behind her, silent, watchful, unyielding. Every step she took felt measured, part fear, part curiosity, part a pulse she couldn't deny. The warning from earlier hadn't been idle. Footsteps echoed outside the chamber, soft but deliberate, as if testing the walls for weakness. Alira froze. Her heartbeat threatened to betray her. Kilrick's hand found hers before she could even think. Not a touch to restrain, but to anchor. "Stay close," he murmured, voice low, almost intimate. The heat of his palm sent shivers down her spine, igniting a fire she didn't know she possessed. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then a shadow appeared at the chamber door, an intruder, cloaked, moving with purpose. Kilrick's eyes narrowed, and with a movement so fluid it seemed rehearsed for centuries, he stepped between Alira and the threat. "You shouldn't be here." Kilrick's voice was steel wrapped in velvet, each word precise, cutting through the tension like a blade. The intruder hesitated, and Kilrick's gaze shifted briefly to Alira. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly, but it held a warning she felt deep in her chest. "No one touches what belongs to me." Alira's pulse raced. Desire and fear collided, an intoxicating storm she could neither control nor resist. His dominance was absolute, but there was something tender beneath it, a recognition that she was fragile, yes, but not powerless. The intruder retreated, unwilling to test a force far beyond ordinary comprehension. Kilrick's eyes followed until the threat disappeared, then turned fully to her. "You're safe," he said, though his tone suggested this safety was conditional, earned, guarded, and fragile. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Instead, she met his gaze and saw something that stunned her: understanding, acknowledgement, and a flicker of something dangerously close to desire. Kilrick stepped closer, their proximity shrinking to mere inches. His scent enveloped her, mixing authority, dominance, and a faint warmth that set her pulse racing. "You've survived tonight," he murmured, "but surviving isn't enough. You must trust me completely." Alira's breath caught. The words carried more than protection. They carried an unspoken promise, a subtle, erotic tension that made her knees weak and her mind reel. She nodded, feeling both surrender and empowerment, the first step toward her rebirth under his watchful dominance. Kilrick's lips brushed the side of her ear. "Good," he whispered. "Now rest. You'll need every ounce of strength for what comes next." And in that moment, Alira understood. She was no longer just a girl caught in danger. She was becoming someone dangerous herself, someone reborn through desire, fear, and the alpha who refused to let her go. Dawn hadn't broken when Kilrick led Alira to the edge of the estate gardens. Mist clung to the earth like a veil, curling around the trees, hiding her from anyone who might be watching. She walked carefully, still shaken, but something inside her stirred, a mix of fear and thrill she couldn't name. "You've been hiding for too long," Kilrick said, his voice low, intimate, sending shivers down her spine. "It's time you see the world you think you understand, through my eyes." Alira's chest tightened. She knew his words weren't a suggestion. Every fiber of her being wanted to resist, but every instinct told her he was right. The world outside wasn't kind to someone fragile and alone. But with him, she could survive. She could fight. She could even learn to take pleasure in her own power. Kilrick stopped near a fountain, the water catching the early light. His gaze locked on hers, unyielding, measuring, almost hungry. "Look at me," he ordered softly. She obeyed, heart hammering. There was no malice in his eyes, no expectation, only intensity, desire, ownership not as a cage, but as a challenge. "You felt the laughter," he continued, voice dropping lower. "The betrayal, the humiliation." Alira flinched but didn't look away. "You left," he said, stepping closer. The air between them crackled. "And in leaving, you showed me something I didn't expect. Defiance. Strength. Fire." Her pulse spiked, and she realized just how close he was, his warmth enveloping her, scent wrapping around her like a tether she couldn't resist. His hand brushed hers, deliberate, casual, but every nerve ending in her body screamed at the contact. "I don't reward weakness," Kilrick murmured, "but I don't punish survival either." Alira swallowed hard, heat rising to her cheeks. She wanted to pull away. She wanted to flee. Yet, a different part of her, the part that had been dormant for too long, wanted to lean into the danger, to see how far she could push against someone so untouchable, so dominant, so alive. Kilrick's hand moved, tracing a line from her shoulder to her jaw, soft, tantalizing. "This isn't about fear," he said, voice husky. "It's about awakening. Rebirth. You're not the girl who collapsed at the ball anymore. You're stronger, wiser, and soon unstoppable." Alira's breath caught. Desire, fear, and anticipation twisted inside her, a dangerous storm. She realized with startling clarity that this alpha wasn't just protector, he was catalyst. And when he claimed her attention so completely, she would never be the same again. And in that moment, she made a silent vow. She would survive, not for him, not for the pack, but for herself. The attack came at dusk. No warning this time. No shadows creeping at the edges. Just impact, sudden, violent, undeniable. A scream echoed through the outer courtyard, followed by the clash of steel and the sharp scent of blood in the air. Alira's body reacted before her mind could catch up, her pulse spiking as instinct screamed one thing: run. But she didn't. Not anymore. Kilrick appeared beside her in an instant, his presence like a force of nature, controlled, lethal, absolute. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice low, dangerous. Alira hesitated for half a second, then stepped beside him instead. His gaze flicked to her, sharp with surprise and something else. Approval. The attackers broke through the gates, masked and relentless. Not thieves. Not opportunists. This was targeted. Intentional. For her, one of them shouted. Alira's stomach dropped. Kilrick moved before fear could take hold. His body became a shield, a weapon, a storm unleashed. Every movement was precise, devastating, leaving no room for doubt about who ruled this territory. But this time, Alira didn't just watch. A man lunged past Kilrick's guard, reaching for her. For a split second, the old fear surged, paralyzing, suffocating. Then something inside her snapped. She stepped back, not retreating, but repositioning. Her hand closed around a fallen guard's blade, grip unsteady but determined. When the attacker came again, she moved. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but enough. The blade caught his arm, forcing him back with a shout of pain and shock. Silence rippled for a heartbeat. Kilrick turned. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at her like something fragile. He was looking at her like something dangerous. The fight ended quickly after that. The attackers retreated, dragging their wounded, Their purpose failed. But the air didn't settle. Not really. Kilrick closed the distance between them slowly, his gaze locked on hers, intense, unreadable. "You didn't stay behind me," he said quietly. Elira's chest rose and fell rapidly, adrenaline still burning through her veins. "I didn't need to," she replied, voice shaking, but steady enough. A pause. Then his hand lifted, brushing lightly against her jaw, not to check for injury, but as if confirming something far more dangerous. "You're changing," he murmured. Elira met his gaze, heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from the undeniable pull between them. "So are you." Something dark and heated flickered in his eyes. Because this wasn't just protection anymore. This was evolution. And neither of them would come out of it the same. The estate didn't sleep that night. Whispers spread faster than the attack itself, about the girl who fought back, about the Alpha King who didn't stop her, about the moment something shifted that no one could quite explain. Elira stood alone on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The world beyond the estate stretched endlessly, no longer something distant or unreachable. For the first time, it felt like something she could step into on her own terms. "You're not running." Kilrick's voice came from behind her, low and certain. She didn't turn immediately. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." Footsteps closed the distance between them. She felt him before she saw him, the heat, the presence, the gravity of a man who commanded everything, except this moment. "Most would," he said, "after what happened." Elira turned then, meeting his gaze. There was no fear left in her eyes, only clarity. "I'm not most people." A flicker of something dark and approving crossed his expression. "No," Kilrick murmured. "You're not." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive. His hand lifted, slower this time, as if giving her space to step away. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, deliberate, searching. Not possession, not control, something deeper. Recognition. "You could leave," he said quietly. "No one would stop you." Elira's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "And if I don't?" Kilrick's gaze darkened, something heated and dangerous flickering beneath the surface. "Then you stay," he said. "Not as someone I protect." His thumb traced lightly along her jaw. "But as someone who stands beside me." Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the weight of that choice. Because this wasn't survival anymore. This wasn't hunger or desperation. This was power. And what she chose next would define everything. Elira stepped closer. Not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to make her answer clear. "I won't be hidden," she said softly. Kilrick's lips curved slightly, something rare and real. "Good," he murmured. Because neither would he. The space between them burned unfinished, unresolved, and undeniably pulling them closer. And as the night stretched on, one truth settled over everything. The girl who entered the mating ball just to survive was gone. In her place stood someone the Alpha King didn't just refuse to let go, but someone he was no longer sure he could ever control.